All right, welcome, everybody. This is the first day of the Jhana Samadhi Cessation series. So today will just be an overview, um, an introduction to the series and um, what to expect. Um, so the source text we'll be using initially is Dasa's Mind Illuminated. And the link for that is in the Discord. Also provided here at some point in the class. And yeah, this will be the real step by step A through Z um, attention and meditation uh, development series. So a lot of what I've been teaching and have taught for a couple of years now is just non-duality or things from the path, more so from the fruition lens. So if you hear a lot of my talks, I'm often speaking from the absolute perspective, or you'll hear me say like the present moment is not produced, the nature of your mind is unborn, you never enter or exit reality. These are all uh, absolute view teachings. Other examples of that are, for example, The Yoga of Radiant Presence by Peter Brown, The Open Secret by Tony Parsons. And there are other notable works as well. Um, but my main motivation for starting this particular class and wanting to um, provide this approach was I had a couple students um, say that despite coming to the classes, um, there wasn't um, there wasn't shifts into or shift into non-duality that was occurring. I guess what I was saying makes sense, but the concern they were presenting to me was, yeah, I've been listening to this and many other teachings, but I'm still very much the same person, same type of same degree of identification and craving, for example. So, what was it that you did? What was uh, the training that you went through like, and could you provide that for me? So I just mishmashed that up from like, the few different people that said had different requests about this. I'll give you a little bit of background information. In my um, life as a practitioner, I began quite early, so I think I did my first serious meditation retreat when I was 18. At the time, the access to non-duality teachings like Angelo's channel and the Awakening to Reality blog and um, all the YouTubers that talk about this, including myself, it wasn't nearly as available or accessible. All those authors existed, Peter Brown and guys like this, but I hadn't known of any of their works. I was just mostly plugged into Theravada Buddhism. So Vipassana, Goenka. Um, I had read Dan Ingram's Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, so I'd happened to find that. So that was where most of my work and time as a practitioner was spent. It was spent in very much the gradual approach practices with what I now call the attempt to develop concentration and samadhi. Jhana, samadhi, cessation. So jhana is the Pali word for um, a state of immersion, collectedness, or absorption. Uh, Technically, it is the meaning of the eighth aspect of the Eightfold Path, which is right concentration or right meditation, depends on the translator. Um, Back in the day, there wasn't as much of a revising of terms. So back in the day, it was just called right concentration. Now it's called right immersion, right concentration, right meditation, right collectedness, blah, blah. But back then, it was just called right concentration. In the Buddha's life, he practiced various forms of meditation and asceticism in his attempt to end suffering and realize enlightenment. And part of his um, journey to the discovery of the Eightfold Path and the Dhamma as we know it today was practicing various concentration methods. So the early discourses, the suttas talk about two teachers that he had trained with that had taught him two different states of um, meditative absorption or jhana. And one of these teachers, I believe, was Alara Rapaputta, and the name of the other one's escaping me at the moment. But respectively, they taught him the samadhi of infinite nothingness and the samadhi of neither perception nor non-perception. So often in discourse on this topic, you'll hear the word jhana and samadhi used interchangeably. Why is that? So in Theravada Buddhism, samadhi refers to um, the entire endeavor of the development of concentration, but it also refers to the attainment of concentration. Jhana specifically, though, only refers to the attainment of concentration. There's no such thing as a jhana practice. So jhana is a state one enters. Once one is in that state, that's considered um, the attainment. Yeah, it's like saying it's similar to saying the cessation practice. There's no cessation practice. Cessation is not a practice. It's a state or a non-state, something that the mind enters when um, the conditions are ripe or have become sufficient. So there are different degrees of absorption, different degrees of jhana. The Mind Illuminated will talk about like a light absorption, a medium or middling absorption, and then a deep absorption. And those three stages, of course, will be covered here in our series, but most of what would be accessible in your daily life and in your daily practice would be either the first or the second degree uh, depth of jhana. Unless you go on to retreat, it's not very likely that the nimitta will actually appear and draw you into that third stage of depth. Nimitta is the Pali word for sign. So it's referring to a specific mental object that appears as a result of the unification of mind. So an example of how this occurs is, let's say I take um, this area as the uh, focal point for my attention, the area beneath the nose, and I just pay attention to the breathing as it comes in and as it comes out. At some point, my mind will become very collected in that process. It'll become anchored to this. And the mind can remain at this point, noticing the breath all day and all night with very little distraction from it. So you can see what I mean by this third stage of depth is a retreat kind of thing. At some point, as a result of that level of collectedness, a image, a nimitta, will appear in the mind's eye that is a reflection of the purity the mind has entered. So often people describe it as a disc or a cloud of white, or sometimes it's like as clear as the sun. Other times it's soft like a piece of wool. Um, yeah, so the types of nimittas and the degree of their luminosity changes or can vary as a result of the depth of one's unification of mind. Yeah. So for this very, very deep type of jhana, um, a nimitta appears and the mind is then drawn into it. And there's a loss of body perception, body awareness, and um, discursive thinking completely stops. Your mind becomes absorbed in that object, and because it becomes absorbed in an object, it's like it basically falls into um, the nimitta. It falls into a dimension of luminosity and or voidness, and in it, the perception of the five senses have either ceased or become quite suppressed. So this is an example of jhana, an example of um, samadhi. When the mind falls or enters a state like this, certain factors and qualities that are not usually accessible to the meditator blossom. Equanimity, bliss, one-pointedness, rapture. Rapture is a Buddhist term for happiness, or intense happiness in this case, and other qualities. So, like for example, in the first jhana, you generally have the qualities of applied attention, sustained attention, rapture, bliss, and equanimity, uh, or one-pointedness. So as one progresses through the stages of absorption, progresses through the jhanas, the qualities which define these states begin to become uh, lower in number. So in the second jhana, for example, the applied attention is said to fall away. In the third, another set of factors falls away. By the time you get to the fourth jhana, it's just equanimity being the main quality that is arising in the mind. So that's how the approach is to the deep absorptions. The ones that we'll be working with in the series are the light absorptions or light jhanas. So these just refer to um, when your mind is in a collected state, or when you're aware and you have these qualities in the mind present, for example, happiness, equanimity, um, and you're with the meditation object, whether it's the breath or loving kindness, um, you're in the jhana. So, so I'll explain that again. Like in these maps where the jhanas are defined as very accessible and very light, it's not like this crazy attainment thing where you fall through a hole and then you appear in the first jhana. For example, in tranquil wisdom, insight meditation, and then also in the approach in the Mahasi tradition, these lighter jhanas are accessible immediately, here and now. And of course, there's suttas that talk about this. That like the moment your mind gives rise to loving kindness, that is jhana, right? The moment your mind uh, touches loving kindness and begins to radiate it, that is considered jhana. So the difficulty with um, Buddhism, all forms of Buddhism, is the nature of terms and the inconsistency in terms, definitions, and what is regarded as attainments. So, like from the tradition that I came from, jhana is not a practice, and even in the way that I explain it, jhana, I don't consider jhana to be a practice. But there's many approaches that disagree with that and would say, for example, like if you're radiating loving kindness as you're walking around, that's a way of being in jhana, being in a state of wholesome collectedness while engaging in activity, and that is very much a practice in the sense that you're doing it as you're going walking through space or as you're going from one place to the next. How is it not a practice if it's something that you're walking around doing, right? Yeah, so there's uh, different ways, and this is and how this is talked about, different ways and how it's defined, and the various traditions that have their specific definitions are in disagreement with each other over uh, what jhana actually means, um, and what it particularly entails. So, for example, I'll only get into this very briefly because it's not particularly practical. But the groups which adhere only to the suttas in regard to jhana practice. So an example of traditions that do that are TWIM, Tranquil Insight Meditation. They only adhere to the suttas. Another teacher, for example, would be Tanisaru Bhikkhu. So he just refers to the suttas on these matters. There's no word for nimitta in the suttas. There's no mention of it. It's something that emerges in the commentary or literature, the Visuddhimagga and the Vimuttimagga. The Buddhaghosa's path to purification, and I can't recall who wrote the Vimuttimagga, but yeah, these are the two big Pali commentaries in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. In the commentaries, of course, the nimitta is there, and they only refer to these super deep levels of jhana. But in the suttas, you'll see statements like, uh, as soon as the mind touches loving kindness, that's jhana. For he who has jhana and wisdom, or jhana and insight, nibbana is near. Uh, the benefit of jhana is immediately known here and now. It is a dhamma that is immediately accessible. So, based on many references in the suttas, you'd come to the conclusion that, okay, it doesn't seem that jhana is some deep, special state of absorption, but that it's something that is a word for what happens when the mind enters or touches wholesome qualities. And as a result of touching those wholesome qualities, it begins to let go and turn away from unwholesomeness. and from clinging, craving, aversion, all of these things. So there are many, especially more modern groups that only adhere to how this is presented in the early discourses or in the suttas. And then there's the groups and traditions that adhere to how it's presented in the commentarial literature, which is a higher standard in regards to the depth of concentration, in regards to the depth of the absorption. So in the light jhanas that we'll be practicing here, and you'll all some of you may experience these deeper absorptions randomly, or you may just have a propensity for it. It's not particularly important, and I'll explain why. Yeah, the reason primarily we'll be looking at the immediately accessible light absorptions is because it's only that level of purity that is needed to actually experience or enter um, deep states of meditation, or to experience cessation of perception and feeling. This was something that was a big point of contention for me for many years, because I was trained in the commentarial tradition. So I was trained in these very deep levels of absorption that I was never able to get to because they were so deep and required like 2 or 3 months of retreat. And I went and did those retreats. I went and did very long retreats. And my success was up and down. Let's put it that way. This was before the uh, shift into non-duality that many of you have heard me talk about in the Angelo podcast and elsewhere. So uh, an example of the difference also was like with the deeper absorptions, you're able to enter them for things like 3 hours at a time. So your mind enters this thing, 3 hours passes. No body perception, no mental rumination. Uh, if you had pain, no pain, and full maturation of jhana factors, depending on which absorption you go into. That's a better example of what's accessible on a retreat. If you were to just do one method and focus on it for 2 weeks, then that kind of depth can open. Um, that may happen to you, but it's not something that we're going for. We're not going for that depth unless we set up a 2 week retreat or whatever. So that's an example of like how far that can go. All that's required though is enough wholesomeness, enough purity, enough release to turn away from craving. That purity that is sufficient to have the mind let go and turn away from craving is jhana. So light, middling, deep. Middling is the area between the light and the deep, which is a vast terrain. So it's just a convention. It's just a term that we're using for anything between uh, entry into contact with unwholesome, or sorry, entry into contact with the wholesomeness of the qualities of jhana, all the way to very very uh, deep immersion, or deep collectedness, unbroken awareness. What's the function of jhana? Why are we doing this? Um, in Dasa's Mind Illuminated, he lists out 10 stages of attentional development, uh, 10 stages of meditative stability that um, were much were popularized by Asanga, who was a Mahayana Buddhist luminary. The stages of the development of attention go from the initial stage of just being with the breath for like a few seconds at a time, or being with a meditation object for a few seconds at a time, being aware for a few seconds at a time. That's the initial stage, stage one, all the way up to stage 10, where the mind is completely unwavering at will for extended periods of time. So also that's something that is likely accessible on retreat, or likely only accessible on retreat. Uh, Not to limit any of you, of course. It may be possible, but generally, this I think kind of that further end of the attentional development, meditative stabilization spectrum, anything above stage 7 is the degree of unification that usually just arises in retreat. I'll give you an example of you what this kind of looks like. I won't mention the name of the teacher, but I had a teacher, or have a teacher who uh, is trained in all of this, and and she's considered a master in the jhanas, and she said point blank to me, yeah, I can't access them off retreat. So in my daily life, teaching, talking, doing things with people, it's not possible. I have to be in meditative conditions, and it takes some time. So in my case, for example, with cessation of perception and feeling, it um, takes about 3 or 4 days, or for that level of meditative stability to arise, and for that for the enlightenment factors to sufficiently develop, so that the mind is actually able to vanish into cessation. And samadhi is also a general term in that it's used in many traditions. For example, in yoga, samadhi refers to fruition, or fruitions or attainments, like cosmic consciousness, non-duality. For example, there's a term called nirvikalpa samadhi, which refers to the extinction of the ego, or the extinction uh, of the mind, the conceptual mind. It's often regarded as a permanent state. So when someone attains the nirvikalpa samadhi, it's like their um, reactive mind either completely vanishes permanently, or it is majorly attenuated. Samadhi in Mahayana Buddhism refers to can either its definition would depend on what words are put in front of it. Like nirvikalpa samadhi is an example. Um, there was a talk we did called the jeweled mirror samadhi, right? So yeah, so like I said, there's uh, how the word is used is different depending on the tradition. In that text, the jeweled mirrored samadhi wasn't referring to a specific state; it was referring to a realization. So nirvikalpa samadhi in yoga is not referring to a state; it's referring to a realization. So in Buddhism, Samadhi is referring to states. Theravada Buddhism, Samadhi is referring to states, and not referring to uh, realization. So it's a bit of a confusing matter, but um, just do your best. We'll do our best to understand how this is approached in different schools, and how it's relevant. The purpose of jhana is that these stations of letting go, they're often referred to as the jhanas themselves are often referred to as stations of cessation. So in the first jhana, what has ceased is the fixation on sensual pleasures. So when you're in just the light jhana of the first jhana, so specifically that means, let's say you're doing loving kindness, you're radiating loving kindness, there's happiness in the mind, you're aware for those few minutes or for those few seconds. When you're in that awareness, when you are aware and in that radiation of loving kindness, your mind is not engaging or fixated on sensuality. So in the suttas, they'll say, secluded from sensuality, secluded from unwholesome states, he enters and abides in the first jhana, accompanied by applied attention, sustained attention, rapture, bliss, equanimity, and one-pointedness. So there's many discourses or suttas that say those exact words. Secluded from unwholesome states, secluded from sensual pleasures, he enters and abides. So by definition, it means that in the jhana, there is no preoccupation with sensual desire or sensual pleasure in that particular state. So when you're in it, those are the qualities that are absent. Because the mind is removed, or because it is not engaging in thoughts of sensuality, the bliss, equanimity, rapture, and one-pointedness that is natural to a mind that is released from those things emerges. Those qualities emerge. So the argument, the case is being made is that the reason those qualities are not constant or immediately accessible is because of the fixation or obsession with sensuality. It doesn't just refer to sex, by the way. It could refer to the type of fixation that we have with food, the type of fixation that we have with physical comfort, the type of fixation that we have with comfort that's related to the body. So the idea is that by letting go of this, even temporarily so, the inner comforts of the mind emerge: bliss, equanimity, one-pointedness, collectedness of mind. Because we're always oriented towards the body and what it wants, sexually, sensually, that fixation on that, the fixation on those cravings, because it's so persistent, prevalent, and frequent for us. It's a way that the mind is always engaged. It's a way that the mind is continuously engaging in identifying, and fixating with an object. And generally how it's regarded is that it's fixated with an object that produces suffering. So by turning uh, from sensuality, even if temporarily, by releasing the mind's fixation on that, uh, these qualities inherent in the mind begin to emerge. So the Visuddhimagga is called the path of purification, right? And the early Buddhist discourses are presenting a path of purification. Purification of what? Purification of the mind. And what is the mind in this context? The mind is that which is experiencing. So we're talking path terminology here, right? You've heard me talk from the absolute perspective many times where I say there's no mind to be found. There's no actual thing called mind. Let's put that aside for a moment and just speak from the relative or conventional reality. Mind is that which is happy and that which is sad, right? Things go well, your mind's happy. Things don't go well, the mind's sad. The mind is like water. So whatever food colorings or impurities are in it, that is what the mind is taken to regard as itself, actually. When there's happiness, I am happy. When there's sadness, I'm sad. When things are going well, I'm okay. When things aren't going well, I don't like this. So in jhana, the mind is suffused with qualities of wholesomeness, qualities uh, that are defined as purity, for example. And this isn't a moral purity, it's a qualitative purity. So an example of what would be considered impure is if I was to experience anger and then just start shouting at somebody. Uh, in in the context of this practice, that would be considered unwholesome or impure action. Why? Because the basis of that action is uh, a negative emotion. And as a result of the arising of that negative emotion or unpleasant feeling, there is a reaction, um, a harmful reaction, either harmful to myself or harmful to another person. How do you know what's harmful and what isn't, or what's wholesome and what isn't? After you engage in that action, there's regret. You feel bad about it, and that's further that creates further what's considered to be further impurity in the mind. When you engage in a wholesome action, there's um, happiness upon that reflection. The point uh, the point of jhana is that it's a ladder. It's a gradation of letting go. In the first jhana, sensuality is what is let go of. Ill will is what is let go of. The hindrances are what are let go of. So any degree of animosity, um, sluggishness of mind. As you progress uh, through the jhanas, uh, the mind becomes progressively a mind that is more released. So jhana one, I'll just lay it out. Jhana one, attention, applied attention, sustained attention, rapture, bliss, equanimity, and or one-pointedness. Jhana two, applied attention, um, I believe applied and sustained attention fall away. So there's or just applied attention falls away. Let's just say only applied attention falls away. So you have sustained attention, still happiness, bliss, equanimity, one-pointedness. The third jhana, there's no longer sustained or applied attention. It's just bliss, happiness, equanimity. The fourth jhana, um, there's just equanimity. So that means in the fourth jhana, the main predominant quality is this imperturbability of mind. It's like perfect balance. The fifth jhana is called the realm or the sphere. Both terms are used. The realm or the sphere of infinite space. The sixth is the realm or the sphere of infinite consciousness. The seventh is the realm or the sphere of infinite nothingness. The eighth is the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. So as you progress through the jhanas, the coarser and less refined aspects of experience either fall away or become suppressed. So like when you're experiencing the realm of infinite space, the mind just opens into this boundlessness, this very very deep spaciousness. And in the terminal and in the approach in which we're using the light definitions or light metrics, when you experience this expansion, that's infinite space. So by the standards of jhana that are light, all of you have experienced most of them, if not all of them already. So at least if you've been long-term meditators, you've been doing this for a while. You go into meditation and you experience this like immaculate, profound, overwhelming bliss or bliss and equanimity. That's third jhana or fourth jhana or in that area. The formless realms or the formless jhanas are the gradual and very much perceptible vanishing of mental processes. So like in the infinite space jhana, that's still a quality. The mind is expanding, or the mind is expanded. When it goes into infinite consciousness, there's the sense that consciousness is everywhere, or that everything is a consciousness. And in this approach, the standards are not so set in stone. So one person may experience it a bit differently than another person. What infinite space is like for one person may be a bit different than what infinite space is for another person. But the quality of spaciousness is what defines it. The formless realms are, or the formless jhanas are also like, they have same with applies to this earlier subject of the depth of jhana. So like you the initial contact with realm of infinite space could be the opening of the spaciousness. It can go from that level of depth all the way to there's a student here that ended up in infinite space for like 5 hours. Just touch that spaciousness and bang, there was only space. That was the only experiential quality. There was no mind wandering, no coming in and out, no passage of time, no perception of light, no vacillation of thinking. It's just space. So each each jhana has its uh, capacity for depth. You can see these as like bandwidths or I have to find a better analogy than bandwidth, excuse me, on that one. It's like each one is a different frequency. It has different qualities, but the degree to which those qualities um has a significant level of depth. So that's infinite space. The quality of space is primary. Then you have infinite consciousness. Quality of consciousness is what becomes the primary thing in the field of experience or in the mind. The next is the realm of infinite nothingness. And then after that is the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. So infinite nothingness is when the quality of nothingness becomes absolutely primary. And then the eighth jhana or the eighth absorption is uh, neither perception nor non-perception. So that's when the mind enters this quasi present state, like it's on the edge of experience, and that's a spectrum as well. So, for example, in the in the practice of tranquil wisdom, insight, meditation, or TWIM, um, when the mind gets so still, and then these visions of like space opera stuff start happening, or possible visions of past lives, the imagery in the mind's eye becomes hyper real, and the mind is able to rest in um, this very very deep quietness for extended periods of time, quietness or signlessness. So like at this point, there is no quality that is becoming primary, like in all the other formless states. It was space, consciousness, or nothingness, right? But in this neither perception nor non-perception, the mind is beginning to detach from all qualities and signs completely. So it's also referred to as a signlessness. What occurs in the eighth jhana is that when the enlightenment factors come to maturation. So in Buddhism, there's seven enlightenment factors. The factor of tranquility, factor of rapture, the factor of mindfulness, um, the factor of equanimity. Uh, there's there's three other ones that are also important, but the idea is that you reach this pinnacle, or you arrive at this pinnacle where the mind is really not doing anything anymore. It's not engaged in anything anymore. It's not oriented towards signs anymore. It's very, very released, very, very released. It's uh, there's no longer letting go that is happening. You're past letting go. The mind has become uh, so quiet that it remains in this let go state for extended periods of time. My friend Delson calls it letting go of letting go, or having let go of letting go. So really, the mind becomes very, very quiet. It's at this point that the enlightenment factors reach their maturation. Equanimity primarily reaches its maturation. And one of the three doors to the deathless arises. One of the three characteristics, which is suffering, dukkha, impermanence, anicca, and no self, anatta. So one of these three arises uh, at that at that edge of reality or at that edge of experience. And contact with one of those three characteristics produces an involuntary letting go. It's like a deep letting go that just happens. There's nuance though, because sometimes the first time I experienced it, there was still a voluntary letting go, but often people describe it as like it's just an automatic turning away from samsara that occurs. So one of the three characteristics appears. That characteristic then arises as the entirety of the field of experience. So if it's the suffering characteristic, everything arises as suffering. The breath becomes suffering, thinking becomes suffering, consciousness becomes suffering, feeling becomes suffering. Everything becomes suffering. It's very palpable. It's very deep. It's so deep it causes a letting go. It's so deep that the mind becomes dispassionate about experience, dispassionate about dispassionate about form, dispassionate about feeling, dispassionate about perception, dispassionate about volitional formations, dispassionate about consciousness. The dispassion increases the equanimity factor so sufficiently, so highly that the mind then even ceases to turn away from samsara. All formations, all motivations, all movement, all craving, all desire, all grasping stops. And then you disappear. And that is the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. Depending on the tradition, the moment that occurs, uh, you're considered awakened. The three characteristics appear. The mind has contact with one of them. And as a result of contact with one of the three characteristics, it vanishes and touches the unconditioned. And what that means is that the mind touches something outside of conventional reality completely. And and this is an opinion, or this is what an observation that I'm presenting here, or that I've made based on this, that um, other teachers may disagree with me on, but I have found it to be the case. In that moment, the mind touches something so far outside conventional reality, it doesn't remember it. And that absence of memory is what is considered to be the cessation of consciousness. Like there's a gap in the memory, in the tape reel of memory. So there's this total, abandonment, or yeah, complete non-action after contact with one of the three characteristics, and then gone. That gone, in the moment of gone, and I mean gone, gone, like gone, cessation of consciousness level gone, uh, the mind touches something that is ultimate. Now, in Theravada, the view generally is that there's only one ultimate. My take is that there's likely entire strata of ultimate or unconditioned, uncompounded phenomena. And that makes sense considering that when people talk about this, they describe something different, some different kind of inconceivable or very difficult to describe thing that was touched um, after the cessation occurs. So you have the arising of the three characteristics, the cessation, meaning the field of experience goes offline. After the field of experience goes offline, it turns back on in a flash or in an instant. When it turns back on in a flash or in an instant, It's like the rebooting of reality or the rebooting of consciousness occurs. That's how it's perceived. So in that moment, you experience reality is experienced without feeling and perception, without self, without ego, without attention, without intention. All of those factors of consciousness and qualities of experience that we're used to, they're absent in the moment after cessation. So in that moment after cessation, it's like a seeing beyond the veil in a way, and how the mechanics of experience or the mechanics of consciousness appear in that may be different depending on the practitioner. So what generally occurs is that there's that cessation, everything goes offline, everything reappears. When everything reappears, the mind naturally reviews what happens. So this is in the commentary 16 stages of insight as well. When you read the 16 stages of insight, you're like, okay, so after I enter this thing called fruition, then I have to look back and see what happened. And then that's when the craving, grasping, what is referred to in Buddhism as the five lower fetters, falls away. So attachment to rites and rituals, doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, self view, and there's two other ones that I can't recall at the moment. But all those fall away right after the review. So when you read the commentaries and you read the 16 stages, you're like, okay, yeah, after I touch this thing called the unconditioned, then I look back and see what happened. That's not what happens. What happens is when you touch the unconditioned, it's so you vanish. So because you don't know what the hell just happened, the mind naturally does a review. So when the mind does the review and it reviews the path to cessation, the path to that unconditioned, then it sees that this fell away as one entered the cessation. This emerged when one came out of the cessation, came out of the cessation. With the arising of this, there's the arising of that. With the cessation of this, there's the cessation of that. So you see what aspects of experience disappeared, leading into the cessation, which ones emerged afterwards. So you get a very you get a deeper mechanical insight um, into consciousness. That insight, that insight is what uh, is regarded as the understanding that uh, annihilates the five lower fetters. Why? Because once you touch that thing, once you touch that unconditioned or uncompounded phenomena, or once you experience this cessation of consciousness, uh, whether there was recollection of an uncompounded phenomena or not, even just the cessation, that is such a profound vanishing that you no longer have doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma, or the Sangha. So the moment after the arising of, or after the re-arising of consciousness, so this is called the moment of post-cessation, the mind may experience a vision, or it may experience dependent origination. So it may, yeah, and that is something that is um, there's levels of it. So some people see it as a visionary thing. Not just levels. I mean, there's different configurations of it. Some people see it as a visionary thing. Others just realize it as a very, very clear, undeniable insight. I mean, it's just like doubtless in that moment when it arises. Dependent origination is the insight that explains uh, how craving um, acts as a condition for birth and rebirth. Yeah. So with that understanding, one is then, at least in the Theravada tradition, considered uh, awakened, the first stage of awakening. Yeah. So what defines the higher stages of awakening, like Sakadagami, Anagami, Arhat? So these are all terms for the the falling away of specific uh, defilements in the mind. So in the second stage of awakening, it's not so clear. Like the terms and definitions there are not as clear. But in the third and in the final stage, it's regarded that, for example, the third stage, you lose all lust, all anger, and then in the fourth, you you completely overcome ignorance and conceit. So conceit is like self, basically. The remnants of self are gone. One of my teachers, Tina Rasmussen, put it pretty well this way, that the four stages are like uh, best described as this. At the first, you lose 25% of the self. At the second, you lose 50% of the self. At the third, you lose 75% of the self. And at the final stage, you lose all of it. And generally considered that there are very few people that are that far blown out that there's absolutely no self and no reactivity remaining. A good Theravada teacher, Beth Upton, she said when she was asked about why she returned to lay life, she was a nun for a long time with Pa Auk Sayadaw in Burma. She was asked, yeah, why did you leave becoming a nun, or you were a nun for 10 years? Why did you come back? And her response was something along the lines of, got tired of all of us pretending to be anagamis. So she just point blank said, tired of pretending to be above lust and irritation when clearly we weren't. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, let's take a 5 minute break and then we'll get back to we'll get back to more specifics on cessation. Yeah, so 5 minute break, everybody. I think that was 5 minutes. So, we'll share the rose apple tree story of the Buddha as to why jhana became, core of the practice, why it's mentioned so many times in the discourses. Um, I think I was going in this. I was explaining this story, but then yeah, went on a tangent or something. But the Buddha learned the two upper formless realms, so realm of infinite nothingness, and then neither non-perception from teachers in India during his time, 2,500 years ago. And he mastered them, and both teachers wanted him to teach his disciples based on having mastered and attained uh, those states. Because the Buddha's primary concern was the end of suffering, he found that despite having attained these meditative states or these absorptions, that he had not ended suffering. So in the absorption, of course, if it's very deep, there's no perception of the body. So if there's no perception of the body, there's no suffering. But when one emerges from the state and is engaging in the world and has a contact with the senses, um, craving, aversion, all these bases for suffering arise again. So that was the Buddha's conundrum, you would put it. After having mastered the seventh and eighth absorptions, he then went to practice with the ascetics. So, uh, particularly the ascetics that engaged in self mortification. So, self mortification is torture, self torture. Like it referred to the sets of practices and traditions of India that have to do with like very, very extended fasting, laying on nails of beds, laying in the sun until your skin turns very, very, very dark. And the Buddha described in detail his um, journey of 6 years through these uh, deeply ascetic self mortification practices. He said, for example, I lived on a grain of rice a day. And I did so to such an extent that when I touched my stomach, I touched my back, and my skin had become paper thin. And the veins, you could visibly see the veins within my body uh, were visible from the surface of the skin. So in some temples in Thailand, I actually have a statue here in the room of the skeleton, the Buddha in his skeletal form, where he had done the 6 years of asceticism and was uh, deeply emaciated. By this point, uh, he nearly dies as a result of the asceticism, and uh, as a result of that, um, he breaks his fast of 6 years. He concludes that this can't be the way. Um, I've tried this path of asceticism harder than anyone I've encountered, anyone that he had encountered, and still it bared no fruit. So there was uh, a dish that was offered to him by a milkmaid, and with that he regained his strength, and he sat under the Bodhi tree and made his vow for enlightenment. In that sitting, he had recalled an earlier time in his childhood where he had sat under a tree in his father's garden in his palace, and it's called the rose apple tree, and he had entered a state of wholesome absorption. He had uh, entered jhana, and so he had recalled. He said, "Ha, is that wholesome uh, that wholesome purity, that wholesome purification? Is that the way to the unconditioned? Is that the way to the deathless?" And so reflecting on that, he uh, made the vow to either attain enlightenment or die under the Bodhi tree. So when he sat under the tree, wasn't doing these ascetic meditations or whatever. He had returned to a form of jhana, a form of absorption, which was he considered to be wholesome and conducive to liberation. So the story goes was that he uh, through the jhanas and through this like wholesome release, he attained the three super knowledges. So uh, attainment of recollection of past lives, attainment of insight into the law of karma or the transmigration of beings, why beings are reborn here or there in this form and that form. And the third final insight is insight into dependent origination. So insight into the direct cause of suffering, insight into why craving arises, and how craving conditions acts as a condition for the re-arising of consciousness and the production of rebirth. Yeah, so jhana is at the core of of Buddhist practice because it provides a path of letting go all the way to experiencing or touching the unconditioned and then accessing the three super knowledges. And that is what results in the destruction of craving. And that is the aim of the Theravada Buddhist path. The overcoming of grasping, the falling away of attachment, the falling away of self. So as part of the overview, from many different traditions, you could see how this falling away of self, this falling away of delusion, this falling away of the false is presented as the goal or presented as the actual case. It is actuality. There actually is not a self, but we live and operate as if there is one. So, because of uh, that ignorance of the truth, we engage in activities, we generate karma, we have intentions to perpetuate, protect, and extend this self. And that is exactly what keeps us in samsara. Yeah, so jhana is like the vehicle for these particular insights that break the wheel of samsara to occur. This was the Buddha's approach. This is what's laid out in the text, and this is what many people have practiced. But in my opinion, it's not the only way or not the only approach. Even within Buddhism, of course, there's many different methods and many different views and positions. So that's all something to sift through if um, if you care to. But if you don't, the main Yeah, the main point here is the end of grasping, the cessation of self, the cessation of being this or being that, being a person. Um, how nibbana or nirvana is considered is even something that's up for contention. That's debatable. Some people define it as this, some people define it as that. But what is generally considered to be not debated at all in the context of the fruit or nibbana is that craving, attachment, and aversion die. Yeah, there's many passages that just say nibbana is the end of the defilements. Nibbana, enlightenment, is the end of cyclic existence. So jhana is a means to that end. So if I snapped a finger or the Buddha said some words or some other teacher said some words, and then that cessation of all of those things occurs, you have no means for jhana, right? Because the jhana, the path factors, the enlightenment factors, all of those things they're part of the ship that takes you across the ocean or across the river of delusion, of I, me, and mine. All right, so this was the intro.